All right, welcome. Tonight I'm going to talk about Dinosaur Ridge. We're going to do a virtual tour of Dinosaur Ridge here. I did this trip last year, going to do it in just a couple days. So wanted to share with you some really cool features at Dinosaur Ridge, plus some other places where you see some really cool dinosaur trackways and significant things about dinosaur fossils. So let's get into it. This is my family, my wife and I and our kiddos here. We're missionaries with Alpha Omega Institute for now just a little over 10 years already. And we'd go around teaching creation science. I'll explain to you a little bit why we do that. And so here I want to talk a little bit about the history, some of the fast facts about Dinosaur Ridge. It's a national natural landmark, and it's maintained by the Friends of Dinosaur Ridge, founded in 1989. And it's associated also with Triceratops Trail in Golden, Colorado. So they have two different types of spots to go walk around. And they've voted this trackway at Dinosaur Ridge the #1 trackway in the U.S. And you'll see why if you ever get a chance to go there, or hopefully from this presentation as well. They get about 250,000 visitors every year, which is pretty cool. It was first discovered during when they were doing road construction, as that's often when they were finding fossils and things early on in history, in the history of building out this country. And you can still see the dynamite drill holes in some places. And then some professors, Arthur Lakes, continued to do more research and more exploration around Colorado. He worked with Othniel Charles as well to discover more dinosaurs here at Dinosaur Ridge. And there was kind of a bone wars going on during this time. Once people started finding really cool dinosaur bones, everybody tried to go and see what they could find. And it was kind of that race to see who could find as many dinosaur bones as they could. And this particular spot, it's Dakota Hogback is where Dinosaur Ridge is. Dakota Hogback, it's called a hogback because it's kind of a narrow, long ridge line that sticks up. And on the one side, it's assumed to be 100 million years old. That's in the late Cretaceous. It's assumed to be a shoreline with sandy beaches and tidal flats. Notice I'm using the word assumed to be, because when we're talking about the past, we're forced to make assumptions about the past, right? And you'll see why I don't believe in the millions of years, right? The west side rock layers, they're underneath, and they're a little bit older. They're in the Jurassic period, about 150 million years old. So ultimately, let's back up a little bit. Let's say, okay, well, why are we talking about Dinosaur Ridge? Why is this significant? Why is this important? It's dinosaurs. It's cool, right? But why does it matter, ultimately? Why do dinosaurs matter? Why does it matter for us as a Christian, as a creationist, right? Or as an evolutionist? Why would it matter? Evolution says that dinosaurs lived and died millions of years ago. They're millions of years old. These dinosaur bones and things, fossils that we have. But I think when you read the Bible, you read it plainly and you read it simply, it seems to present that the Earth is not millions and billions of years old, probably more like 6,000 years old. So which is it? Are dinosaur bones, fossils, millions of years old, or are they thousands of years old? I like to use these three questions especially as well. This is the first question here. If the first chapters of the Bible are not true, then why believe the rest of it? You know, we're taught in our culture that, well, let's look at the next question. It says, if the Big Bang and evolution are true, then does God really exist? You know, we're being taught in our culture evolution and the Big Bang are proven science. Is that true? I don't think so. And we're going to look at some of the evidences here. So for this particular question, I don't think evolution and the Big Bang are true. Some people are trying to use these ideas, these theories, to try to be able to do away with God. But I think we do have evidence, positive evidence for a creator God. But let's back up to the other one. That means, you know, if evolution, if the Big Bang are true, it doesn't fit with the beginnings of the Bible, and so as many try to do, they just try to throw the Bible away. But we're going to look and see, no, the Bible is reliable. There is good evidence for it, that it is true. So, what about the next question? I had a third question as well. If I'm just an evolved animal, but does my life have value? Does it matter? You notice here it's this, a notebook for a student or something like this here. Ultimately, all of us really have these questions kind of, or I think most of us go through these questions at some point in life and have to kind of weigh out what's true in life for ourselves, right? But I don't think we're just evolved animals, guys. We are not just evolved animals. In fact, here's a quote. They say, and I don't believe this quote, but this is a quote that I've seen here. The fact is, we humans are just as much animals as any worm, toad, or pig. What? No, I don't believe that. That's not true at all. In fact, and I think we know deep down within us, and automatically, if we said, what's the difference between humans and animals? There's a big difference there, guys, right? We see it. You guys know it. And we see it in Genesis 1:27. God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So, in this culture, like I already said, you're going to hear things all over the place, in movies, in TV, in magazines, in school, all over the place. You're going to hear about evolution. You're going to hear about the Big Bang. You're going to hear that it is science. It's proven science. I don't believe it, but let's dig in. Let's do the research. Let's study. Let's compare creation, evolution, and see what's true here. Because ultimately, when you dig up bones, when you do research, oftentimes in science, when you dig up bones specifically, they don't come stamped, hello, I'm 95 million years old, right? They don't come, with a tag that has the age on it, or made in China. They don't come stamped that way, right? So we have to interpret the fossils. We have to interpret the evidence. Think about these questions. What color were the dinosaurs? We don't know. You have to make assumptions. You have to interpret the fossils and try to figure it out. And we have found some skin pieces and things so we maybe can have some good guesses at these questions. But what was their diet? We can guess a lot of things. We can make a lot of assumptions, but we don't fully know, right? We're making assumptions. What environment did they live in? Okay, we don't exactly know. We can tell what other fossils are buried around them. When did the dinosaurs live, right? We don't know for sure. We can do our research, get some evidence together to say we think it's this old or that old, right? But in all of this, we got to keep thinking about this question: what's the evidence? What's the evidence, right? Keep that in mind. Keep that in mind. That's one of the big things here. So when did dinosaurs live? This is a question you have to make assumptions to answer this question. You have to make assumptions. We don't know. It doesn't come stamped with a number. Even if it did come stamped with a number, I don't know if I believe that, right? So you have to make assumptions in science, which is kind of weird. Some people think, well, I live by science. I don't, it's just the facts. Just facts, please, right? But no, there's assumptions, there's guesswork, there's gray areas that we don't always know how to interpret the evidence the best. And I'm glad that this science placard here says, this museum placard says, scientists and artists have to interpret the fossils. So we know that, right? We see that. And here, just keep thinking about these questions. Questions are so important to us to be keeping in mind. Learn how to ask questions. Keep asking questions. What's the evidence? Were you there? How do you know that? No matter what topic or what scientific field somebody's presenting on. Well, what's the evidence here? You've got your theory, but what's your evidence to hold up your theory, right? To base your theory off of. And so, because we have all these different sciences: geology, biology, astronomy, anthropology, right? Some people interpret it according to evolution. I think a better perspective is to interpret it according to the Bible. And I think there's good evidence for that. We're going to look at some of that tonight. If you don't believe me for the rest of it, keep digging on our website online. Keep looking up good sources on what's true, creation versus evolution. I like our website, www.discovercreation.org. I think I have that here coming up soon. www.discovercreation.org/evidence. And that is some of my favorite arguments. And really, when we look at the evidence, you have to interpret the evidence. Which way does the evidence land? Which way does it fit best? The evidence fits better my way. No, the evidence fits better my way, right? It's a struggle over the interpretation of the evidence, of the data. And sometimes, I think there's good reason to doubt the Big Bang and doubt evolution. There's some big gaps there. And so some people challenge us or critique us as creationists that, well, we just see these gaps and we just plug God into the gaps. When we have a gap in our scientific understanding, we just plug God in. Kind of like this guy living, thousands of years ago, let's say, and in this little hut, he doesn't know anything, boom. It's flashing outside. You get these big boom. And what is this sound? What are these flashes? I don't understand this. This guy's freaked out of his mind, right? And, he probably comes up with this idea that there's some God that's mad at him, right? Some people think that's where religions all come from. I don't believe so. I think the idea of God is not just because of this. Some people are trying to do away with God. Even though they know Romans 1 says that we are all without excuse, all know that there is a God. He's made himself evident and clear to us. But this is not the creationist perspective or the Christian perspective at all, because I think when we look at the evidences, and I'll just list a whole bunch of them real quick, the DNA, the information in our DNA, in our bodies, that points to an intelligent designer, creator. Biological features indicating design, life from non-life. How do you do that? I think it points to a designer creating life. Mutations and natural selection are just not enough for evolution to happen. The lack of transitional fossils, I don't see it, guys. I'm not seeing the evolution there. Geologic evidences for a worldwide flood. Astronomical features indicating the youth of the universe or the solar system. Different objects in space, right? Astronomical features indicating their design that we can't figure out a natural explanation for these things. Meaning, morality, and reason. Reliability of the Bible. Evidence for Jesus' resurrection. All these things, I think, if you can't explain it naturally without a designer creator, you know what I think it is? I think it's actually positive evidence pointing to a creator, to God, right? And here's I like to give out this handout, and that's on that website, like I mentioned, discovercreation.org/evidence, and you can look at some of my favorite arguments for God in the Bible, and just click right on the videos as on that page. It's pretty good page to get you started. So when we look at geology, here's the Grand Canyon. We see all these layered rocks going up and up and up and up, right? I think we see evidence that things are quickly deposited, not slowly deposited. These layers are quickly deposited because there's flat contacts, one layer after another layer after another layer, no evidence of any erosion that would happen over thousands or millions of years, right? They're widespread too, and they're flat. They taper off at the ends, but you've got huge layers that go for long distances of fairly consistent materials within. I think it's all these things are ultimately pointing to the fact that these things are quickly deposited and not slowly deposited, right? The bent curved rock layers had to be soft and squishy still to be able to bend together, all these layers bending together, not cracking and breaking over long periods of time, right? Or things being buried quickly, fossils being buried quickly in one of those points there. We see evidence that these things then have eroded quickly, not slowly, right? Because the cliffs are still very steep in many cases. There's very little talus at the bottom of the cliffs, and steep cliffs oftentimes indicate hard rock, but still, over time, those cliffs will widen out and narrow out. The tops will erode faster, then the bottoms will start building up the talus, the debris at the bottom. But we don't see enough of that for evidence of long ages of time, right? So here's what the Bible says. In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month. So, okay, is this just a fairy tale? I think there's actually some history to this. I think this is written historically. I think we've got some evidence from the numbers here, from the data, from the way it's written, that this is recording history, right? And it says, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened, and the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. This is a big flood. It goes on to talk about the waters rising up for 150 days, and taking 150 days to drop down again. So it's at least a year's time when you add up all these days, right? So, is that true? Is the Bible true? And what's happening today is people are saying, no, there's no evidence of any global flood. The rock layers are evidence of, they cry out millions of years, right? They're saying it's evidence of millions of years. It's evidence of the flood, guys, and we're going to look at some evidence. But it's this idea, did God really say that happened, that that's true? Just like Satan did in the garden. Did God really say you shouldn't eat of that fruit of the tree? So what does the Bible say? If the Bible's true with geology, then the Bible's going to be true in other things that it says, if it is true, right? But it gives us more evidence, more ability to trust the Bible if we see that, hey, these things are reliable, right? We see Romans 3:23 tells us, and I believe this is true, I think we all know it, right? We all feel guilty. We all know when we've done wrong. I think that's one of the best arguments, evidences for God, right, guys? You felt it. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Now, we might still be good people, right? You still think, well, I'm a good person compared to, some crazy murderers, right? But if we've broken the law, we've broken the law because God is the creator. He's perfect. He's holy. He's all-loving, all-knowing. Like, he's not going to be able to withstand any sin in his presence. And so we're out of luck, guys. We fall short of heaven, of the glory of God. We can't make it on our own. We have sinned. We've messed it up. But God, I love it. I love verses like this, right? But God commendeth his love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. How awesome is that? We were still sinners, and Christ died for us, right? We don't deserve it of our own works, of our own merit, of anything of ourselves. It's Christ. Praise the Lord, right? So, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved. This was written to, I believe, the jailer there in Acts. But let's do it ourselves as well. Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved. So, did God really say, is this all really true, right? And we already mentioned these verses. God has showed it unto them. He's made himself manifest to us, right? These things have been clearly seen, that we can see God, so that we are without excuse. So, as we keep going, as we look at Dinosaur Ridge, that's all the kind of introduction stuff on why is all this really important. If we're seeing geology that points to the flood, that's evidence the Bible's true. And if the Bible's true on that aspect, we have more reason to believe it's true in other aspects. And if you don't believe me, do the research. Okay? Do the research. Read the Bible. What does it say? What fits reality best? I think Christianity makes sense of our origin, where we came from, our meaning, why are we here, our destiny. It makes the most sense of all of that, right? So, you will see at Dinosaur Ridge, you're going to see some crocodile claw marks. some ripple marks and evidence of design within creatures, within the fossils, evidence of living things in the past. And we're going to talk about the marks like that, the ripple marks, the claw marks, footprints. Think about it. When we walk down the beach, the next day, are our footprints preserved? Do they fossilize? Maybe they won't fossilize within one day, but are they at least going to be preserved? Most times, not at all. You may be in certain situations, but it's very rare. But these things have to be covered really quickly with mud before everything cracks, before everything gets distorted, before these footprints wash away. These things have to be buried quickly to form fossils, right? These dinosaur trackways, I think what we're seeing is dinosaurs moving through wet sand, and more sand fills in right over the top of it. And so we're going to talk about that. At this track site, this is going to be kind of the next stop on our tour. You will pass some crocodile claw marks, like I said, but then you get to these dinosaur tracks, and we call tracks, we call footprints, trace fossils. They're not actually the living things turned into rock, but they are the impressions that become fossils or become rocks. So made by living things, they're trace fossils. So some track facts about this spot here. There are approximately 300 tracks in this area here of Dinosaur Ridge, Dino Ridge. You can actually volunteer and help stain the prints. That's kind of cool. They recognize that there's probably 4 different animals making 37 individual dinosaur trackways here. Most are hadrosaur or duck-billed dinosaurs like iguanodon. They're possibly moving in family herds, they think. And there are also theropod dinos here as well. And they think this is the underwater or coastal sand, kind of think of like beachfront property, right? Right here in western Colorado, in the west, or in central Colorado here. But they call it the Western Cretaceous Interior Seaway. And so they believe that happened millions of years ago, that we had this interior seaway dividing North America in half. So did Colorado look like Florida? Again, these are big assumptions you have to make. We don't for sure know. But what we do know is that these footprints have to be rapidly filled in with mud to be able to form fossils today. Interesting, I think this is so cool. Here's a quote here. It's talking about, so often we find footprints, trackways in the fossils, in the fossil record, down lower, and they tend to be going up a slope, but lower in the fossil record before we ever find the bodies that made those tracks. So if it was hundreds of thousands, millions of years between footprints and the bodies, we should have an equal mix of bodies and footprints, bodies and footprints, bodies and footprints, just things living life over millions of years, right? But what we see, this is a worldwide tendency, you see the tracks before the bodies. Isn't that crazy, guys? Isn't that amazing? A worldwide tendency for body fossils of amphibians and reptiles to occur in strata above the trackways. That doesn't point to evolution. That doesn't point to millions of years. I think it's creatures moving up wet sand, wet mud, as the flood waters are going back and forth, coming in and out with the tides and things moving, and the tsunami washes coming in from all the tectonic activity during the worldwide flood. They're trying to get up, they're trying to get away, they're trying to get through the mud, get up to higher ground, I think is what we're seeing. So, trackways before bodies, tracks have to be filled in quickly like we're talking about. They recognize this, they say there has to be water involved in this fluvial or river type of entombments or burials here, right? And there's places too, it's interesting, There's dinosaur mega track sites or freeways out here in the west. One mega track site in southeast Utah is on the upper boundary of the Entrada Sandstone, a supposedly desert sandstone. All the tracks are from a fairly large carnivorous theropod dinosaur. It is indeed strange that one type of dinosaur lived in a large area of an alleged desert. What were they supposed to eat in the desert? Interesting. So again, here's the evidence. But what all evidence do we have? They think it was a desert. Evolutionists think it was a desert. But maybe it was mud stacking up during the worldwide flood. And in fact, here's another trackway or freeway. A dinosaur freeway has been discovered that stretches from northeast New Mexico to northwest Colorado. The tracks are generally of two types and are found on multiple stratigraphic levels that are supposedly span several million years. Since the strata containing the tracks are probably conformable, it does not seem reasonable that only two types of dinosaurs used this freeway over several millions of years. So we find two types of dinosaurs. Why only two? Over long stretches of time, we should see all kinds of different footprints and whatever of all kinds of different creatures. In fact, look it up, guys. There's some great evidence that they have found fossils of all kinds of different things living alongside dinosaurs, ducks and possums and all kinds of modern day things living alongside dinosaurs that you don't usually hear about because they're interested. We tend to be focused on the dinosaur fossils. That's the cool stuff. And then there's all these other, other things randomly here and there, right? But we're not seeing any evidence of things changing from one kind to another. No evidence of evolution from what I believe we're seeing. So there are many large bone beds or dinosaur graveyards where you find thousands of dinos, and it indicates catastrophic action. Something catastrophic happened to bury these thousands of dinos in these spots all around the world. It's all over the world. These bone beds tend to be monospecific, meaning one species, typically, for these bone beds. Mostly one, at least, for a lot of them. Practically all the bones in these monospecific bone beds are disarticulated and broken, right? So that's significant. That means that there's something pulling these apart, or breaking these dinosaurs apart. And then we find that baby dinosaurs in these big dinosaur graveyards, in these big quarries, dinosaur quarries, we don't tend to find the baby dinosaurs. We find adult dinosaurs of typically one type of dinosaur, like they're in a herd, moving. I think all this is significant, guys. All this is significant. As succeeding years yielded no other major finds of baby dinosaurs. Notice the little baby dinosaur guy up there in the corner there. I love the little baby dinosaur guy from that TV show. But this question, where are the baby dinosaurs, grew in importance. If you think about it, more dinosaurs should have died young than died old. That's what happens with most animals. And the high infant mortality should have produced a lot of fossils over the course of 140 million years, a lot of fossils that have never been found. And yes, we find things here and there and stuff, but we need to find a lot more if millions of years are actually true. The pervasive lack of very young dinosaurs and the occasional monospecific bone beds of broken and disarticulate bones is most unusual. The lack of young juveniles in the monospecific bone beds is perplexing because young dinosaurs should have accompanied older dinosaurs in a herd, as observed in herds of dinosaurs today, right? So we're not seeing what we expect to see if millions of years are true. I think we're seeing dinosaurs probably running, probably moving through sand, moving through mud, trying to get uphill in the encroaching floodwaters, the encroaching tsunami waves, and sometimes get swallowed up in these herds. These herds get swallowed up that way. So baby dinosaurs are very rare. Again, why? Why are they very rare? And What's interesting, I think, is if you've got these herds of dinosaurs moving from tsunami waves of mud coming up onto land, washing back and forth and coming up during a flood perspective. So they're trying to find these islands of land, you know, the higher land. The adult dinosaurs, they're more mature, they're more able and able to run and get away, and probably they get away, but the baby dinosaurs are left and buried sooner than the rest of the herd, than the adults. I think that's a reasonable, good explanation for the evidence we see. In fact, that's why I have this on the screen about China. In China, they have found 25 young or immature dinosaurs, and what they find is they generally are facing more or less the same direction, so there's some indication of movement or flow, that they're all being pushed in, pulled in, whatever you want to call it. We see them typically crouching, their legs are bent, maybe struggling in mud is what it looks like. Again, that's exactly what we would expect, is these dinosaurs swallowed up in the mud. First, the baby ones, the young ones. The bigger, faster ones can still outrun it for a time before they are swallowed up in these big herds as well, on the small, higher lands that they're trying to get to. What we see is dinosaurs were wading, swimming, stampeding in mud. I think it fits the flood perspective. So, with all this, a takeaway here, the most important takeaway is that I think we're seeing evidence of the flood. And if the flood really happened, that's good evidence that the Bible's true, right? If the Bible is true about the flood, it's probably true about other things, like Jesus, right? And He is the Creator, but all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, but God commendeth His love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved. Okay, it all matters, guys. It all matters. I love science, but it's about eternity, ultimately. This is why I teach this stuff, right? Is there is an eternity. And where are you going to spend eternity? Have you made it right with the Lord? Another site that you will see on Dinosaur Ridge, you will see a raptor claw and concretions at this overlook. So it's Colorado's first raptor track. You can't see it in this picture very well, but go there and you can take a look closer at it. But think about dinosaurs supposedly evolved into birds. I want to just touch on that for a little bit here. Here's a picture of the dinosaur evolutionary tree, okay? But you gotta always ask that question, what's the evidence? What's the evidence? What's significant here? What am I looking at, and how do we best interpret the evidence? When you look at a chart like this, colors matter, right? All the little details matter. You have two different colors. You have black, you have white, and at the bottom it says tinted areas indicate solid fossil evidence. So what evidence do we have? This kind of dinosaur, and 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 this kind of dinosaur. What about the transitions between the dinosaurs, the evolution of the dinosaurs, how they came from common ancestors, supposedly? That's the supposedly part. That's the part we don't have. That's that we don't see the transitions of how these dinosaurs came to be into the forms they are. There might be similarities between different kinds of dinosaurs, just like we have arms and monkeys have arms, and all kinds of creatures have front limbs, right? But what's the evidence of the transitions, though? I don't think we have it. And we've found tons of skeletons, tons of fossils of dinosaurs. We've got a lot, and the more and more we find, the more and more we tend to find the same things over and over, not the transitions. We're not finding the transitions. And you think about dinosaurs going to birds, there's some huge gaps there. And you know, one of the things I meant to mention when I talked about the God of the gaps idea, they say we believe in just a God in the gaps. When we don't understand something, we just plug God in. When scientists, evolutionists, atheists don't understand something, they say, well, science will someday solve it. We'll someday figure it out with science. See what they did there? They plugged science in, which might not be a bad problem. But if they're going to accuse us of plugging in something into the gap, they are doing the same exact thing, right? I think there's some huge gaps from dinosaurs going to birds. I don't think it's possible. I don't think it happened. Specifically, reptiles, dinosaurs, we believe are like reptiles, have a lung system like us, a closed lung system. So you got your two lungs there. So example of this is, do this with me. Take a deep breath and hold it. Ready? And take another deep breath. And take another deep breath. Okay, you can hold it, you can let go, Don't hyperventilate there. How much more air did you get in your lungs? Maybe a tiny bit, but we have a closed lung system. The air comes in, the air goes out. A bird's lungs are totally different. They can send air up and through and in and around, and they've got different pockets, and helps them to puff themselves up at times, get through the air or whatever, make themselves get through the air better in the currents. Totally different. So there's some huge gaps there. I mean, if you create, extra holes or extra pockets in your lungs, it's often not a good thing. And so it's more than likely going to be a bad thing and going to cause problems rather than help you evolve. So there's ultimately, and you can believe that that's the truth, that that's possible, but that's what it is. It's belief, it's faith, guys, okay? So another thing, and then even just like think of, dinosaurs have arms like this, and then birds have arms that flap like this. That's a totally different shoulder structure, totally different structure with the muscles of flapping rather than, your dinosaur arms, right? So totally different, big gaps there. If you try to plug in the science in the gaps, great, but you know what, ultimately I don't see it possible really or reasonable at this point. I think it's evidence that these things are designed, created. So then, another thing we see at this section, at the top of the hill in Dinosaur Ridge, we see concretions of sand, sometimes iron as well. At least in many other places around the world, we see iron concretions, we see rock, sand concretions as well. It almost kind of looks like an eyeball in the side of the hill here. I think these are evidences of a global flood, okay? And I haven't done a whole lot of research on this, so let's hold this a little bit lightly, but let's think about it. If you have long periods of time of sediments slowly building up over thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years, all this stuff is slowly settling out and creating rock layers, it's all going to be about the same. You're going to get the same kind of even mixing of the cement, right? But I think what we see is we see places like this where you have these concretions of hardened rock, extra compact, extra cemented here compared to other pockets that aren't as cemented. In fact, you can go the other way and see a lot of these holes in the rock that develop over time, and we call that differential erosion, or you could call those holes topony or tophony in sandstone rock. I think, I think there are places that are less cemented in many cases, which wouldn't happen if it's all settling out over long periods of time. It's all going to have similar structure and composition to it. These are air bubbles. These are things mixing really quickly during the worldwide flood. Some of it gets more cement, some of it doesn't. And then obviously time and erosion will also help these holes to form. But my boss Dave, this is his story, when he was a kid he got a rock hammer. And he loved it. It was great, kid, that's a great Christmas present, right? He's going around banging on rocks, ding, 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 and every once in a while he said he would get a thump, and it'd stick into the rock, like a sandstone rock or something. And that was weird, ding, 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 and thump, and then he'd like chip at it and chip it out, and he said he found a lot of places where there was like unconsolidated sand that was just in that little pocket there. I wonder if that is in situ, meaning I wonder if that never got the cement, and that sand has been there for since that rock formed even. So, but even think about this. Look at the rocks here. This is the road cut on I-70 as you're right there near Dino Ridge. You've got the layers standing up on end like this. And again, here's another picture of that. That's Dinosaur Ridge there at the top of that ridge. So you got the layers going sideways, tilted up. That's a big something that must have happened. Something must have, and the Rocky Mountains did. It went up. This was a big deal, right? This was something big that happened in the past. What's that big to create such earth movements and such erosion? Did these things happen slowly over a long period of time? Maybe. I think a lot of times we see evidence that these things happened quickly and not too long ago. What earth moving events had to happen to tilt layers up so much? I think this could be good evidence for the worldwide flood, right? And in fact, there's more to it than just that. Think of all the rocks that would have been above your head there at Dinosaur Ridge, where the rocks would continue up. Those had to have been washed away at some point somehow. How did those get washed away? And even think about all these other layers, right, that are on top. All that had to have been washed away, and I think this is the Grand Staircase. Here's a good example of that where we know here's the Grand Canyon. That's the big cut there, the Grand Canyon. And then you have all these layers going up and up and up as you move north through Utah. All these different layers, the Grand Staircase. So at some point in time, we expect that there was all these layers on top of the Grand Canyon as well. That, I mean, we talk about the Grand Canyon, that's a huge crack in the ground where there was a ton of rock removed, right? But you would have rock above your heads for maybe, they say maybe a mile or two above your heads you had rock that was eroded away at some point. How did that get eroded away? When? How did that happen? Was it meandering rivers slowly, cutting back and forth across here and there? Which, there's a problem with that, is that rivers tend to get stuck eventually in their river channels and start channeling down into canyons. And the canyons then will then erode over time eventually too. But that's a big assumption. A lot of people say, you believe in a worldwide flood? That's crazy talk, right? That's crazy. That's a big assumption, right? That's a huge assumption to say that there was this worldwide flood. That's crazy, right? It's preposterous. They make us sound crazy, don't they? And I can understand that to some degree, right? But you know what? You talk about millions and billions of years of time. That's crazy. That's preposterous. We don't know if there's been millions and billions of years. How do you know? They've made it so millions and billions of years are normalized, are normal. They talk about it all the time, right? They're conditioning us to believe, well, that's no big deal, millions and billions of years. Yeah, of course that happens. Why not? But, we can't even agree on what happened 2,000 years ago, or 3,000 years ago. It gets even fuzzier, or 4,000 years ago. Forget it. Who knows? There's very little that we ultimately understand from that far back in time. It gets fuzzy and fuzzy, so fuzzier and fuzzier. So I think instead of these meandering streams slowly eroding everything down over long periods of time of that's ultimately, it's kind of a big story you have to try to make up, or a lot of assumptions you have to make, right? I think what we're seeing is whoosh, big washes of water. The Rocky Mountains come up, sheets of water come across the tops of the continents and wipe off the top of everything. And I think we don't have enough of this stuff having been transported out of the rivers to really indicate long periods of erosion. I think it happened probably quickly as a result or after the flood. Another thing, so that was the great denudation, taking the water off of the tops of these things. There's another great here. It's called the Great Unconformity. It's where that arrow is showing right there. So notice too, the mountains there, the core rock of the Rocky Mountains, says it's 1.7 billion years old. 1.7 billion years old is what that actually is supposed to say. The fountain formation, they assume, they think, again these are assumptions, it's 300 million years old. So there's a big gap there of a lot of history, a lot of time, a lot of stories you have to make about what happened during that 1.4 billion years that you don't got any evidence for. And in fact, that Great Unconformity, you see that's basically all the layered rocks start building on top of the Great Unconformity. It's everything underneath. This goes worldwide, guys. The Great Unconformity. Again, the Great Unconformity, it's all the basement rock, the gray stuff underneath, and some layers too. And then all the layers over top of that start on top of it. It's like you have some event or at some period in time where everything started layering up again at some point in time after everything eroded down, or everything eroded down during the flood and started layering back up during the flood. And here's pictures of it at the Grand Canyon. You see the basement rock, or I call it Creation Week rock. That's the metamorphic rocks below, and the Tibet sandstone above, that kind of flat platform. And here's the contact where you see the basement rocks underneath, and then the layers start forming right on top of it. And in many cases you find boulders within the layered rocks just above that, boulders that have been plucked up from underneath and come up into these layers, meaning, okay, that's something catastrophic. That's something big that's happening to rip these hard rocks, the hard metamorphic basement rocks, rip some of these boulders up and into that tapetes or other new layers that form over the Great Unconformity. So these big boulders. And this is something we see all over the world, guys, here too. Nubian sandstone in southern Israel. We see the same thing here in the U.S. and Israel and all over the world. It's like storm beds formed by modern hurricanes. So, what huge earth-moving events had to happen to tilt the layers up so much? Did it just happen slowly over long periods of time? Or I think it could be evidence of the worldwide flood. The Great Denudation is evidence of the worldwide flood. The Great Unconformity, I think, is evidence of the worldwide flood. I think what makes more sense? Maybe it's possible you have such long periods of time slowly eroding everything and all that, but I think it makes more sense that the flood did all this. So then you move down the ridge to the next stop. We see these brontosaurus bulges. These bulges are what it is these dinosaurs, long necks, pushing down into the sand, and you actually get the side view of its footprint there. So you've got a good view of that footprint with the layers underneath the footprint there from the side. And there's a few different ones in this picture as well where this dinosaur has pushed down into the mud. That's pretty awesome. I think that's a really cool thing to be able to go and see. They did some technical, actually no, this is, I wanted to move and give you another example of other dinosaur tracks in Australia where they did some technical descriptions of these dinosaur tracks in the 70s and 80s. They find these dinosaur tracks in alternating layers of sandstone and thin clay. The tracks were made by small theropod or ornithopod dinosaurs that took very large steps. So they assumed that they were running. They were stampeding dinosaurs, coming across here. They were running because they got these long strides between their footprints. So they called it Dinosaur Stampede National Monument. Still called that today, and I think they still use that story today. But they've actually found some more evidence. They've done some more research or some more looking into the site. At least some researchers have. and they found variation in the tracks, sand-sown grain wear, cross-bedding patterns, and such clues as fossilized tree branch scrape marks that best fits a scenario whereby dinosaurs were alternatively floating, partially floating, wading in fast-moving, very broad, high-energy flow event that featured rapidly fluctuating water depths. So what they found was they had these large steps in between the dinosaur footprints. So they thought they were running, but now they're seeing, oh, there's evidence that other things are scraping along the ground, and there's evidence of a flow of water. And that's kind of unrealistic for them to have such long strides. They're realizing that actually they're being carried along in water here. Water depth of 6 inches to 5 feet maybe. In a fluvial dominated floodplain, so river floodplain here in this layer where you find these tracks. And listen to this, the word fluvial refers to river action, but the sandstone formation may be as large as the entire state of Queensland. Are they suggesting that there was a river as wide as Queensland? A great flood makes more sense actually, right? Not a river so wide as Queensland in Australia. Crazy, right? So another example, so that's a cool example in Australia. Another example of footprints that have been found, we find back footprints without front footprints. So this is in northern China. So that were they walking, these long-necked dinosaurs, were they walking with their hands up, or were they swimming? So there's some debate on that still, but they were acknowledging that, yeah, it looks like they could have been swimming maybe. But we also find, I like this one even more, this one's even more fascinating, front footprints, because we can imagine maybe a long-necked dinosaur rearing back, right, maybe. But front footprints without the back footprints is what they find in Texas. Are they doing handstands? Look at that T-Rex. They don't. T-Rex hates handstands. They can't reach the ground, right? With their little hands, tiny arms. So this is Glen Rose, Texas area where we find all these dinosaur footprints. And in this particular area, they actually found 3 side-by-side tracks. And the middle tracks they actually found were smaller and fainter. Which I think is evidence that, hey, these are, what they're saying is that these were probably dinosaurs that were underwater or in water and kind of like punting themselves or pulling themselves along with their forelimbs, their front arms, and actually probably swimming more or less. And it's kind of something like this, is that they look and there'd be more like fat in the tail hind section of the body, and so it would raise up that back end a little more, and so it would actually be pulling itself along with its front legs, and the back would be kind of more up. We're seeing evidence of dinosaurs swimming, dinosaurs wading through water involved in all of this. Did this just happen in, on the sand shore over millions of years? Or is this evidence of the worldwide flood, right? I think it could be very much evidence of the worldwide flood. So we've got the dinosaur stampede in Australia, the hind or the back footprints without front footprints, the dinosaurs with only front footprints. And again, these dinosaur footprints, these tracks, have to be filled in quickly with mud, otherwise they're not going to survive, they're not going to last, right? And then, as you go down further through the dinosaur ridge, you get to the dinosaur bone beds, these big bone beds of fossils. And in many cases, what we find with fossils is fossils just smashed together. Shells, I've found shells in many different places where the shells are all just like compiled, smashed in together. In fact, I'll give you an example of that right here. Look at these ammonites smashed together in this rock. Right on top of another, all smashed together. Beautiful ammonites. This is very common And what that tells me, and even at the Grand Canyon we see smashed fossils from a coral reef type setting, and they say it was a coral reef at some point in time, but you know what we find is it's not this placid, calm coral reef. These things have been ripped up, broken, pulled together in some kind of a flow. This is not packed together, smashed together. This is not just things falling to the bottom of the ocean and slowly being covered over time. Here's dinosaur fossils at Dinosaur National Monument in western northwest Colorado and into Utah. We see Dinosaur National Monument, just a huge wall of bones just pulled apart, ripped apart, smashed together. They usually don't find on the long-necked dinosaurs, they usually don't find the head on the top of the long-necked dinosaurs. And I think it's probably because if they're being smashed together in huge flows of water and mud, the head's probably going to pop off as this little head on the end, right? If it's as violent and dangerous as it looks like it is. So we have these many large bone beds in dinosaur graveyards, where I talked a little bit about it, right? Indicates catastrophe, destruction, something happening quickly. In Montana we find 10,000 duck-billed dinosaurs in just a small area. Disarticulated, disassociated, oriented east to west in a debris flow, right? So there's a flow, there's evidence of the flood. We have dinosaur experts, Horner and Gorman, say, how could any mudslide, no matter how catastrophic, have the force to take a 2 or 3 ton animal that had just died and smash it around so much that its femur, still embedded in the flesh of its thigh, split lengthwise? What? Its femur, that's the longest bone in our body, split lengthwise. Wow, what's going to do that? That's crazy, split lengthwise. How about this? Dinosaur quarries, we find all kinds of them, especially in western the United States, but also worldwide. And some experts say these bones are piled in like logs in a jam, right? Anyone who cherishes notions that evolution is always slow and continuous will be shaken out of his beliefs by Breakfast Bench or Coma Bluff and the other geological markers of cataclysm, catastrophe. And so evolutionists now are forced to say, well, actually it doesn't happen slowly over long periods of time. You have slow, long periods of time of boredom where nothing's happening, things are eroding slowly over time, and then big mudslides and things happen and bury things so that we get these layers, get these fossils that are able to form. So here's an interesting one. Let's move to this dinosaur museum, not far from where I live. They had this, and I think they've maybe since taken this sign down, but they had this sign describing, well, what is a fossil? Let's talk a little bit about fossils more. A fossil, they define it as any evidence of life more than 7,000 years old. Why 7,000 years old? More than 7,000 years old. That's kind of a random number to put on. It seems random, but I mean it doesn't seem random, right? You realize the significance of they want the Earth to be older than 7,000 years old. But we have evidence that that fossils, rock, can form very quickly. Bags of flour formed into rock, a miner's hat that formed into rock. You have teddy bears that are put in a place, I believe in the UK somewhere, where this fountain creates the rock over these teddy bears. You have things like this dinosaur in the death throw positions, and that's very common. The death throw position, where it's kind of like gasping up, reaching up. I think being buried. This is what happens. I actually did experience where they buried chickens in mud and saw the same behavior. Sorry, chickens. But we have evidence from the fossils that things haven't changed in supposedly 100 million years supposedly, and grasshoppers look the same as they are today. That tells me I don't think we have evidence for the 100 million years, right, guys? We see And grasshoppers, ultimately, I think they're very complex, really. And they're same as today, but we don't see the transitions. We don't see evidence of evolution. How about trilobites? Trilobites are actually they have very complex eyes. We don't see the transitions. We see different types of trilobites to some degree, but we don't see what led up to the trilobites. 200,000, I think that's a horrible number. Actually, it's probably way bigger than that, because you can buy a trilobite fossil for a few bucks at a fossil shop. So we don't have them today, actually, but complex, we don't see the transitions. And then how about for these leaves? Same as they are today, no transitions. Dragonflies, same as they are today, complex, I'd say. Very well designed, I'd say. I think we have evidence of design there. This is one of my favorite arguments for from the fossils, where I looked up these numbers. You can look up what fossils have been found around the world. They've found 22,700 fossil rodents, small mammals, right? And bats are mammals, right? They have hair, they're warm-blooded. So they think that these rodent, small mammals evolved into bats over time. And we've found more than 1,400 fossil bats. But where are the transitions? We don't have evidence of any of the evolution for bats. It's missing, it's not there, right? And can you imagine, too, taking those little, stumpy little legs, running around, scurrying around, and those legs have to, like, change form, change size, they're huge, and that's just, yeah, right? It doesn't make sense. I don't see the evidence for evolution. And the giraffes, where are the transitions for the giraffes? This giraffe expert says the fossil evidence for the gradual evolution of the long-necked giraffe is as expected, completely lacking. Okay? They're the same as they are today, ultimately. So, if the Bible's true, we should see things buried and eroded quickly. Check. I think we see that. We should see complexity everywhere. We definitely see that, right? We still look at living things to design better and better technologies ourselves. God designed it best first, right? And if we can't see that, then we're blind. We have a blind faith that is unwilling to see evidence of design. We see things that are the same today as they were supposedly millions of years ago in the fossils, right? They're the same as today in all these different fossils. And no transitions. We're not seeing the transitions to say that evolution is actually a thing. One more thing about fossils too, and a big thing, especially, this is significant, I think, is we've found unfossilized dinosaur bone, meaning that in this dinosaur bone, you cut it open, you can dissolve away, some of the stuff around the rock matrix and stuff, and we're finding biological soft tissue, meaning it hasn't rotted away and it hasn't turned to stone, turned to rock in supposedly millions of years. How can this be? How is it not rotted away or turned to stone in millions of years? It's still biological, stretchy material. In some cases, there's like little stretchy tendons and blood vessels and blood cells in there, and tissues and DNA. They have found DNA from dinosaurs, not much, but bits of it and stuff. And one of the main researchers studying this was Mary Schweitzer. She found that it was exactly like looking at a slice of modern bone. But of course, I couldn't believe it. I said to the lab technician, the bones, after all, are 65 million years old. How could blood cells survive that long? See what she's doing there? See what she's asking there? How could blood cells survive that long? It's just a fact to her that it's 65 million years old. So then how does she reconcile this hasn't rotted away in that long? I think she's asking the wrong question. I think there's a more reasonable, better explanation for that biological material still surviving. And it's not just dinosaurs. There's a whole bunch of different examples of this in living, or from fossils of different creatures. I think they're asking the wrong question. I think it's something like this, you know, millions of years ago, and they look as if they were laid yesterday. Uh-oh. Those guys are in big trouble, right? I think they're asking the wrong question. I think, ultimately, are we sure those fossils are 65 or more million years old? I think it's evidence that it's not that old, right? Are we sure it's that old? I think they're not. And in fact, there was a lot of pushback against her, and she's not a creationist. She's not, she believes in the millions of years, right? But she said she had one reviewer tell her that he didn't care what the data said. He knew what I was finding wasn't possible. I wrote back and said, well, what data would convince you? And he said, none. Yeah. When you talk about science, we always think of science as facts and evidence and just like, give me the data, right? But there's bias, there's interpretation, there are perspectives, interpretations within science that we are, it's subjective still in many cases. So another example of this soft tissue, I think, maybe, they have found carbon-14 in dinosaur bone, which carbon-14 should not be in dinosaur bone. Should have been decayed away a long time before, you know, where we wouldn't find it today. This belt buckle is actually my boss's. He made it. He you know, did all the stone cutting and stuff for and polishing for this dinosaur bone. And so as a young man, and he was an evolutionist at the time, he was grinding down these bones and you know, making them into jewelry. And every once in a while he said he would get a rotten egg smell when grinding these dinosaur bones. A rotten egg smell. What would that mean? I think it could have been some of that rotting biological material that had not turned to rock or had not rotted away yet, or still was rotting, right? He could have been famous if he actually gone and done some more homework, done some more research, and done some more of the work there to discover soft tissues. So, soft tissues in dinosaurs, I think that's huge. I think that points to these things are not as old as we expect them to be, as they are expected to be. If it wasn't millions of years, then there's evidence that the Bible is true. And if the Bible is true, we should trust Jesus with our lives, right? So let's finish up with dinosaurs. How did dinosaurs go extinct? I believe that dinosaurs, believe it or not, survived. They were on Noah's Ark. Well, that's crazy, Brian, right? Isn't that kind of crazy? How could dinosaurs have fit on the Ark, right? They're huge. These dinosaurs are huge creatures, right? How do you get them on a boat? A little boat that Noah and his family made, right? Well, when you look at dinosaurs, when you look at the fossil record and you do find eggs here and there, and we can talk about that, that's another topic, but the largest dinosaur eggs ever found are a little bit bigger than a football, right? That's the biggest dinosaur fossil eggs that we've found. So imagine cracking open, you get this nice cuddly, well, probably slimy, but then you wipe it off. Cuddly dinosaur you can carry around, right? That'd be pretty sweet, wouldn't it? And some dinosaur eggs were as small as robin's eggs as well. So they could be very small. So what if you grew up with a dinosaur? And I actually found this at a secular science museum in Minnesota there. These placards, I thought, this is great. This is exactly what I believe, right? Is that Timmy could have had this newborn dinosaur that he grew up with after 5 years. You know, they're rugrats together on the rug, but after 5 years, here they are, you know, he's training this dinosaur. Maybe he could probably ride this dinosaur around. It could have been a real-life Flintstones, right? So, ultimately, small dinosaurs as babies, you take the young ones, they're going to have the rest of their life to reproduce off the Ark. They're going to be more healthy. They're going to eat less in the Ark. Take the little ones on the Ark, right? You don't need to take the big dinosaurs. And the Ark was huge. Guys, the Ark was huge. If you don't believe me, go to Kentucky and go check out their model Ark there. It is quite impressive to actually be in front of that Ark and see how big it is. The Ark is 450 feet long at least, maybe more. You think about animals ultimately, especially if you take younger animals, the average sized animal, somewhere between a rat and a sheep, not a big animal, probably less than that, on the smaller side, I would say, probably. And you just had to take the different kinds, one cat, one dog, or one pair anyhow. So there's good evidence, good potential for the ark being realistic, being possible. So what killed the dinosaurs? Maybe this killed maybe smoking is the real reason the dinosaurs became extinct, right? Don't smoke, kids, it's bad, very, very bad for you, okay? So that could be, but I think the dinosaurs did get off the ark, so they lived after the ark, after the Noah's flood. So this is alongside people, and we've got this is again more for another talk, but we've got evidence that people saw dinosaurs throughout history. Dragon legends, we've got carvings, we've got pictures of dinosaur creatures all over the place. I think though this is probably what ended up killing the dinosaurs. We ended up killing the dinosaurs. Careful, and little twerps are carnivorous, right? Imagine killing a dragon, a dinosaur. That could feed your whole village for a week, right? And how cool, how big and bad would you be as the big bad hunter to kill the biggest, baddest dragon or dinosaur, right? You'd be pretty sweet dude to provide food for the whole family, so for the whole tribe, right? And so we've got all these legends. I think this is probably how dinosaurs went extinct ultimately. So, most important takeaway in all this, I think what we're seeing is we see evidence for the global flood, the worldwide flood, just like the Bible describes. If the Bible's true about the flood, I know I've said this before, but hey, this is what matters. This is the takeaway. This is the most significant thing, right? If the Bible's true about the flood, then it's true about Jesus. He is the creator. I know I read this to you before, but listen up, guys. He is the creator, but all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. But God commended his love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved. In all of this, I like to end my presentations with this little slide right here. You can trust God from the first verse to the last verse. Don't delay, guys, and don't put off, but we've got evidence for God in the Bible from science. Trust Christ today and be saved, right? Thanks for listening. God bless you. Till next time.